I want to be clear. I love fundraising. I believe in the power of collective action to make change. While I will always talk about and call out the system for where it is broken, there's a very powerful thing about putting power into the hands of people that we can get your neighbor elected. Maybe doesn't come from money and doesn't have this super network or corporate PAC money backing them. Like, our system is structured to allow us to do that. We just have to be more strategic about how we compete. I definitely believe in participating in order to make real change, and I believe in reform.
Have you been feeling disconnected, worried, or overwhelmed in life, or when you look at the state of our country and the world? If so, you're not alone. I'm right there with you, and you're in the right place. Hi, friends. Welcome to the Connected Way podcast. I'm your host and minister of connection, Rev Dev. I believe that connection is the healing path forward for us as individuals and as a collective. So on this podcast, we will explore all things connection. Connection to self, to others, to the land, and spirituality. But specifically in season 1, we are looking at the coming election through the lens of connection. How we can get informed and involved in politics and this election in digestible and engaging ways. How our spiritual and cultural beliefs and values intersect with and inform politics. How this election fits in with the larger evolution of our society, and how we can actually connect with people in these polarizing times. I know that connection has the capacity to move the needle in this election and in our individual and collective evolution. May it be so. Let's get into it. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to introduce you to this incredible guest who we are so grateful to have here on the podcast. It feels like such a win to even have him here. So Derrick is a political strategist, activist, and tech entrepreneur who is revolutionizing civic engagement through his groundbreaking company, Oath, a political fundraising platform that's redefining how people engage with elections, with over $25 million directed to high-impact races in 2024 already and counting. You can donate and find more at oath.vote. And you can find Brian on Instagram at Brian Derrick. I'm going to spell that for you. BRIANDERRICK_. And you can follow Oath at oath.vote. Don't need to spell that one. And Brian also co-hosts the podcast Vibes Only, which provides political insight and commentary. I will share all of those links in the show notes and on the podcast website so you can easily find it. And Brian, I am just so pumped for you to be here. I am so excited about this because I have been wanting to talk about donating and money and politics for so long. When I started this podcast and it was called to start it, it was like voting, volunteering, and donating. Like, those are the things that I have questions about, and I know my listeners have questions about. So I'm so excited to get into it with you. But before we do that, this is the podcast about connection. And so I want listeners to feel a little bit more connected to you first. So you are doing this incredible thing. You are quite young. I'm going to call you out on that, which I love. And I want to understand a little bit about your background and like how you ended up here, which is such an incredible place. But how did you get here? How did this happen?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on. Very, very excited to get into this chat with you. I am an activist at heart and always have been, really. After graduating from Ohio State, where I grew up, I moved to New York and started working for an organization called Lambda Legal, which is the nation's largest and oldest LGBT civil rights organization. And I absolutely loved that work. It set my heart on fire in the best way, fighting to help other people who had gone through some version of what I went through coming out or had their own struggles and trying to make that path easier for them. And in doing that, I kept bumping up against the political world, right? That the LGBT community is like oftentimes the target of a lot of right-wing attacks. And I, especially after Trump was elected, felt the need to be full-time devoted to putting people into office who would fight for everyone. And that's when I made the switch, ran a bunch of campaigns, raised a lot of money for candidates as a finance director and a consultant, and then tried to, just casually fix our broken political finance system.
Just
by launching just that. And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. So an activist to start, and sort of made my way into the political world, I think by necessity.
Great. And so how did you come up with this, small little idea that's having massive impact that is Oath Vote? How did you come up with this? And also, how does Oath work and what is it? And so feel free to combine those things.
Absolutely. In its simplest form, Oath helps donors give more strategically. We analyze races from president down to local school board races and make recommendations to donors for free as to where their dollars will have greatest impact on the issues that they care about, whether that's protecting reproductive rights or fighting against book bans or protecting LGBT equality. And so we came up with this idea, me and my co-founder, because at the time I was working on congressional races and I spent so much time in FEC reports and in campaign finance reports looking at which candidates had raised how much money from who, what their opponents were doing. And what we found was so much money was going to waste, that Democrats were spending huge sums, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on races that we were exceedingly unlikely to win given the current political environment. And all these other races that really had a shot had almost no money at all. They were completely outraised, particularly down ballot races like state Supreme Court, state legislatures. And so we started exploring what would it look like to have a tool to help donors figure that out before they donate. Right. And that is where Oath came from. We started it just as a side project. I was working a full-time job, as well as my co-founder. We built it nights and weekends ourselves on our laptops and launched it in June of 2022. And it took off right away. More than 10,000 people used it in our first couple months to give over $2 million without us advertising it in any way. And that is what told us there was a real need, there was a real opportunity to make a difference. And we quit our jobs in 2023, hired a team, and have been scaling ever since.
Yeah. And do you have 7 full-time staff members now? Is that right? I was trying to sort of sort out that just to give people a sense of how big this organization is. Yeah.
We went from 0 full-time staff about a year ago at this time to now having 7 full-time.
To raising $25 million. So I want to give people my sort of interpretation of how Oath works, and I want you to correct me. So my understanding is that Oath basically makes donating incredibly easy for you to actually have a measurable impact. And so you can go on Oath and basically you can decide, okay, I want to donate to specific campaigns, but also you can go in and choose do you want to defeat Trump? Do you want to have an impact on reproductive rights or LGBTQ rights or the climate or saving democracy or whatever it is? And then they do all of it with data. It's completely data-driven, nerded out science. And they have all the things that you need to know. And then you know that you're actually making an impact, which is so awesome because none of us, maybe some people, but very few people know, including me. And I'm guessing most of my listeners, because we're all trying to figure out how to have the most impact with our money, with our time, with whatever we can do to contribute to this election, but also to general change. And so Oath Vote is doing that all for you. It's all done for you. And they make it super easy, which is so cool. And you also specifically mentioned local Supreme Courts, state legislatures, state assemblies, all the things, which I think is so important for people to hear. One of my first episodes was with a city councilor, Michael Gaudini, and he at one point worked in Texas, and he was talking about state legislature and how important it is to get involved in down-ballot elections. And I know that, Brian, you have spoken about how sometimes that's even more important than some of our, the sort of more known elections, like the big congressional elections. And so I think it's important for people to recognize that you can have a bigger impact sometimes by donating to smaller campaigns that you may not even know about. And guess what? You don't need to know about them because Brian and his team have figured it out for you, which is so awesome. So thank you for everything that you have done. Did I screw any of it up?
No, you nailed it and stuck the landing. That's
Great.
exactly what we're here for. Is we're here to make it easy. The amount of time that someone would have to spend doing this research to figure out where your $100 or your $1,000, whatever your capacity, or five, or five. We've thousands of donors giving $5. It's too much work for one person to take on. But by aggregating all of this data and analysis in one place and making it super easy for someone who doesn't understand politics, but knows that they care a lot about these issues. That's what we're here for, is to translate that. Because when you look at the top, like the billionaires that are playing in our political system like it's Monopoly, have full-time teams of advisors to direct them where they should be spending money in order to get the favorable tax policies and tax breaks and all of these things. Whereas grassroots donors have none of that. And so we are trying to balance the scales to say, oh, let's put some strategy behind your $5 here as well.
Right, which is so awesome. Okay, so let's take a big step back for a second. This is one of the topics, as I mentioned, that I wanted to do the podcast about. And so I have so many questions. But the idea in general is that I want people to feel connected to the way that they are engaging. And one of the ways that we can connect, of the sort of big three in my mind, is voting, volunteering, and donating. And so we have, we have money that we can give. But I have been getting absolutely annihilated with donation requests, as I know everybody has. And it's harassment, basically. Mm-hmm. And so it's incredibly frustrating. And every single one of those every single one of those requests that I get, I have the exact same question, which again is one of the reasons that I started this podcast, which is, what is it for? Why do you need this money? So there's all these questions that come up that are like, why is there some major deadline that you're freaking out about? And what is the money for? And why do you need it? And can you actually help me to feel connected to why I need to help you financially? And do I actually need to help you financially? And so I really want to understand that better. And for reference, everybody, Brian, again, I'm going to call you out a little bit. Brian posted this video a couple weeks ago, I think, where he was like, I'm going to get uninvited from the Christmas party at the White House.
Yeah.
Stop donating to Kamala. And I was like, finally, someone is like talking about this, because I get texts probably 5 times a day. I'm getting emails constantly. I am just getting inundated, and I support the campaign and I have donated already to her campaign. But I'm like, is this where we need to be giving money? And also, why? So this was a question that came up, I think, the day after Kamala announced. I was on a call with Movement Voters Project, and I really love what they do. And I specifically asked, what is this money going to? And they actually responded. And I was like, thank you for telling me that. This is going to helping door knock in Atlanta. And I was like, great, thank you. I will donate, right? And it's not that I won't donate if I don't know it's going to, but it really helps. Mm-hmm. It really helps people to be like, oh, this is how I am making a contribution, right? And so first, let's talk about the sense of urgency thing. What's with these fundraising deadlines? Are they real? I come from a marketing background. I understand sense of urgency. It's one of my biggest pet peeves when someone's like, you have to do this by this time. I don't resonate with that. I don't think it's a great tactic in general. But are there actual deadlines, Brian? What's the deal with the deadlines?
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple major problems there with the current political fundraising ecosystem. I will say, in general, there are no brake pedals. There is no one to say, okay, this race has enough. The staff that are responsible for fundraising, I used to be that staff, have no incentive to say, okay, we've hit our goal, we're going to stop. They are told every single day that they need to work as hard as possible to bring in every dollar possible until the polls close on election day. That is what they are paid to do. And so someone needs to be the brake pedal. Someone needs to say, oh, well, if we're going to spend a total of $100 million in these certain types of races, it probably makes sense for there to be about 20 million of it here and 5 million of it here and 1 million here. And so that's what Oath is trying to do at a macro scale and allow donors to sort of participate in a more coordinated effort overall. But to your point, the pressure for them to raise that money has resulted in some shady stuff going on. And so let's talk about the deadlines. I want to talk about the texts and the emails and the overwhelming nature of it all. With the deadlines, I will say there are real deadlines. The ones you probably hear about most often are the FEC deadlines. That's the regulatory authority that oversees all campaign finance, the Federal Election Commission. And the FEC deadlines are important. They happen once a quarter for most entities, but it depends on the type of campaign you are. And they are important because it signals to your opponent, to potential opponents, if it's early in the cycle, and to other donors how strong the campaign is. Does this person have the ability to raise enough money to have a competitive race? And that's, again, one of the problems that Oath is trying to address by it shouldn't be about a single candidate's network and their ability to raise money. That shouldn't be what determines whether or not they can be in Congress. But right now, that's a very significant factor because we know that it's expensive to buy ads and mail and digital to get your name out there. And you need people to actually hear your name and your policies, something about you before they show up at the ballot. And so the deadlines there are real deadlines, but many of the deadlines that are in your inbox, whether it's an email or a text, are fake. There are fake deadlines used a lot, particularly end of month deadlines in most situations. The campaign might have a self-imposed deadline, but that doesn't mean that there's some sort of catastrophe if they don't hit a certain number by that day. Deadlines are extremely motivating to donors, though. So as often as they can, campaigns do like to use an end of month deadline to try to motivate people to give.
So just the term deadline, it's like how people will buy things on sale, even if it's the exact same price if it's not on sale.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So that's so frustrating because, I mean, to me, there's a lack of transparency there. There's a lack of transparency in many marketing and advertising situations in general. But that to me just, it feels inauthentic and not transparent, create disconnection with people. Right. And so I would so much prefer that they would be like honest, like, hey, here's how we're doing financially and here's what that money is going towards. And we would love for you to be a part of it. Like, take me along for the ride. Don't treat me like just some piggy bank that you're trying to get things out of and you're going to use tactics. I hate that.
Totally. Donors are tired of being treated like an ATM. And that is like the commitment that we made from Oath, like from the very beginning, was no fake deadlines. We will share information about a specific FEC deadline or state campaign finance deadline if it exists and explain why that's important or isn't. No fake matches. The matches of like your dollars will be matched 6-1 are oftentimes either totally made up or like really sort of sketchy in how they're doing the math behind that, particularly when it's a candidate rather than a nonprofit organization or something like that. And sometimes the money that would be matching your donation is already received by the
right. That is always so strange to me.
So we don't do any of that. The whole purpose is civic education and strategic investment. And so why is your money needed? To actually run a strong campaign. What does it do? What is it spent on? And where is it going to do the most good? Is Oath's entire raison d'etre.
Which I love. Okay. So let's talk about where is the money going? So you just mentioned like ads, digital, so why do campaigns need so much money and where does the money go?
Well, it really depends on the level of the ballot and the time of the cycle. So let's talk about level of the ballot first. The presidential is going to spend over $1 billion. And we would say that is past the point of diminishing returns. That a lot of that money is actually not doing any real good anymore. Right. That once you've seen 20 ads, you've seen enough kind of thing.
Got it. This is where there's no breaks. They're not breaking and being like, this no longer has a good return on investment. Got it. Okay.
Whereas down-ballot races, a state legislative race in some states can cost as little as $30,000 or $50,000, which is very little compared to $1 billion for the presidential or $100 million for a U.S. Senate race. And so on those state ledge races, the spend looks completely different. Over 50% of the total budget is going to go to staff. So it's mostly about whether or not you can afford to have an extra person on your team, which makes a huge difference, right? An extra $10,000 on a state legislative race could mean that in the last few months of the cycle, you have one or two more people full-time knocking on doors or working with like local press, getting you out to community events, sort of the key things that we know move the needle at the local level. Whereas a U.S. Senate race, the presidential, we know that more than 70% of the budget is going to go to media buys, whether that's digital or TV. And that's oftentimes the least cost-efficient way to spend money to generate additional votes for your candidate. But it's the only thing that you can do with hundreds of millions of dollars, especially in the amount of time. You can't hire large enough teams responsibly to to spend like $50 million or $60 million on staff on a U.S. Senate race, for example, is not realistic. So a majority of it ends up going to ads, which drive us all nuts.
They do drive us all nuts. But let me ask you a question about that because you are a political strategist. Is that actually helpful? I mean, I know you said that like if someone watches an ad 20 times, it's not that helpful, but like, is it actually moving the needle? So if someone's like, okay, I do want to donate to this campaign and I know that that money is going to go to an ad, is that going to actually help?
There's a huge spectrum of efficacy within the ad space. And so there are ways to actually develop and produce and run ads that are very effective at modifying people's opinions or turning them out to vote, particularly at lower levels of the ballot. If you look at congressional races, most people have never heard of the candidates in the most competitive races for the U.S. House this cycle. Like I could start listing them for you and most of the names would not be familiar.
Yeah.
And so TV ads...
And there's so many of them.
And there's so many of them, right. And so TV ads are actually one of the best ways for those candidates to get their name out there, again, just so that voters have even heard of them before they show up. People's opinions are also more malleable further down ballot at the congressional or the state legislative level, where you're not fully baked yet, right? You're a little bit more persuadable because you don't know the candidates as well. You don't know their positions and whether this person supports or opposes exceptions for rape and incest when it comes to abortion laws. Right. And so like things like that can really change people's minds. Whereas at the top of the ticket, whether it's Trump or Kamala or Biden or Hillary, like people have really strong opinions about the people, and it's very hard to change those opinions, even if you show them a bunch of ads in a row. Right. And so there's just more of an effect further down ballot. So not all ads, whether it's digital or TV, are a waste of money. There's also a difference in the quality. I'll just like sort of point to message testing as an important development of the last few years, where rather than just like produce an ad and say, we think this is great and just put it up on TV, they do tons of testing now about how it resonates with different kinds of voters to make sure it reaches the people it's intended to.
Yeah. I mean, market research and advertising is so important. I know that from working in the industry, but like, come on, like the attack ads drive me bonkers. And so I do as much as I can not to watch ads, especially during political season. But it's helpful to understand like that it can in some situations. And my hope is that eventually the way that politicians are engaging with us with campaigns is more connective and from a place of transparency and like, hey, this is what I care about. It's not necessarily about attacking each other because that creates more disconnection. So anyways, so I am curious in general. So obviously there's like the grassroots funding that you're doing, which for anybody that doesn't understand what we're talking about, this is for people who don't have staff who can tell them like, this is what you should donate to. So basically, probably anybody who's listening to this podcast, you are a grassroots donor. So the way that you're doing this is great. And I want to understand how campaigns are funded in general, because it's not just grassroots funding. So where does campaign financing come from in the US right now in general? Like, tell me just like basics.
Yeah, the basics are that for federal elections, once you go to the state level, it really varies state by state. And so it gets complicated quickly. At the federal level, contributions come from individuals and PACs.
Yes, we're going to talk about those.
Yes. Corporations are not allowed to give directly to candidates at the federal level. The maximum contribution to a federal candidate is $3,300 per election.
Wait, hold on. The maximum that you can give from one person to a campaign.
Correct. So
say it again, $3,300?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
What?
people are usually surprised to hear that.
Okay.
And so there are other things like that I think give this perception that it's all huge checks, like a victory fund, which at the presidential level gets a lot of attention because it's a conglomeration of a bunch of entities into one super account. So it's like the DNC combined with the Harris campaign, combined with some of the state parties, and you can write one check to max out to all of those entities at the same time for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay, wait. So then what's the difference between that and the $3,300?
Yeah, that's only really applicable at the presidential level.
Okay.
For a U.S. Senate race or a U.S. House race, you are maxed out to the candidate at $3,300.
Got it. So you can write a $200,000 check to the Harris Victory Fund.
Correct.
Great. Okay. Got it.
That would also be maxing you out to the DNC and to, I'm going to estimate here, the Michigan State Party, Democratic State Party, and the Arizona Democratic State Party. And so they have to add all of those maximums together to get up to that 200,000 or 700,000 number.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that the Harris Victory Fund is the sort of conglomeration of all these different things so they can have a higher maximum.
Exactly.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't understand that. Okay.
Right. But if you've maxed to that, then you couldn't go max to the Michigan Democratic Party, for example.
Right. Because you've already done it by doing it at the Harris Victory Fund. Got it.
Correct.
Okay. So tell me about PACs, because this is so confusing.
Yes.
So I know that it's a political action committee. Is that right? That's what a PAC is.
That's
and there are super PACs. There's non-connected committees. There's hybrid PACs, leadership PACs. I think one that's called, is it separated segregated funds? What are these? And what's the deal? And they feel shady. So what's going on, Brian? Give us the tea on the PACs.
Yeah, I would position PACs as being one entire category of political organization compared to a 501c4 organization or a 501c3 organization. A C3 is a nonprofit. All the nonprofits that you think of, the Red Cross or something, are C3 organizations. They can't endorse candidates. They can't do overtly political things. And they are tax exempt. Then you have 501c4s, which are social welfare organizations, which can do political things, but it cannot be a majority of their overall budget. They need to spend at least 51% of their budget on other stuff, on issue advocacy. So lots of 501c4s would be organizations that organize around reproductive rights, where it's not necessarily candidate work. They're not endorsed. Some of them can or have separate entities too, but the C4 is not necessarily just endorsing candidates. They're not just raising money for candidates. They're also doing specific advocacy work around an issue. Okay. PACs are the purely political entity. Donations to these PACs are not tax deductible. They are money that is given to a PAC can be given directly to a candidate, and which 501c4s cannot do. And the idea, and it's all disclosed. When it comes to PACs, all of the money is, you file reports and show this is where our money came from and this is what we spent money on. There are, of course, exceptions to every rule, and all of the different kinds of PACs that you just listed make it a lot more complicated. But I think, without going super into the weeds, the important thing to know is that since Citizens United in 2010, which opened up this flood of dark money and corporate money into our politics, the PAC system has gotten more and more convoluted. As there's a great book by Jane Mayer called Dark Money. If you're interested in this topic, I recommend that.
I'll put that in the resources for the guests. Or for the
hefty.
listeners.
It's a hefty read, but it really gets into the weeds around the Koch network and how the far right has really used these type of shell games to hide money and make it seem like there are all these organizations and all these grassroots efforts and all these people, Americans for Prosperity, like these very innocuous things that are all funded by billionaires, that are all.
Is that what is the Heritage Foundation a PAC?
The Heritage Foundation has, I would have to like look, but probably has 6 different entities all within its umbrella. And so they have a C3, they have a C4, they have a 527, a super PAC, they have hybrid PACs, they're all called different things, but the same people control all of these entities. So they can get one donor to write a check that is not disclosed to a C3 or to a C4, and then that entity could end up writing checks to other organizations or to PACs, and again, it just like all moves in a very obfuscated way. I can't say that word.
Interesting. It's okay. And so are there limits to what people can give to PACs or corporations can give to PACs?
Okay, so it depends on the type of PAC. Some PACs have limits. If it's like a standard federal candidate PAC that is writing checks directly to candidates, then there's a limit. Usually $5,000 or $10,000 a year, depending on how it's filed.
Per person.
Per person. Yeah. So you could write 5,000, your partner could write 5,000, like something like that. There are also super PACs, which do not have limits.
Okay. Those are the ones that we hear about the most, I feel like.
Exactly. Yeah. And those are the ones that, again, they play this shell game to try to hide where the money is coming from, but you can have a billionaire give millions and millions of dollars to these super PACs that are dedicated to electing a particular person. So Timothy Mellon, for example, this cycle has donated over $50 million personally to Donald Trump's super PAC, and also spent somewhere between 15 and 25 million for RFK Jr. Because that was part of like the same Trump strategy, was to peel off votes from then Biden. And so, yeah, you can have Miriam Adelson has put 90 million into a super PAC this cycle for Trump. And so like no limits, very few, very poor transparency, very few restrictions. The major restriction for a super PAC is that they cannot, and I'm using air quotes for audio people, they cannot coordinate directly with the campaign. But that is, the spirit of that is violated all the time. And I would actually say that it is outright violated all the time when you have staff.
They cannot coordinate with the campaign, meaning like they can't impact the way that the money is used or like what it's for. But isn't that kind of the point of a PAC?
So the PAC is run by is ostensibly independent of that effort, like the Save America PAC, one of the ones supporting Trump. And he couldn't call up the head of that PAC and be like, hey, we need more people on the ground in Georgia, or like we need to put up more ads in Arizona. They can signal to them publicly anything he could tweet, hey, it would be great if there were more ads in Arizona. And then because that's for public consumption, someone at that PAC could then read that tweet and decide to spend more money in Arizona. There's like all kinds of ways to get around it, which is why the Supreme Court ruling was nonsense. But that is the limit that's been imposed, that you cannot coordinate directly between the two.
Okay. And are PACs actually doing things, or are they just funders? Like, are they the middlemen?
Yeah. No, they are doing stuff. Ron DeSantis had no field operation for his presidential. It was entirely outsourced to his PAC.
What?
Yeah. And so...
Wait, so then they're not regulated the same way?
Exactly. And that's what caused a bunch of drama with his presidential campaign, is that you had all these people who were essentially responsible for his entire field campaign, all of the door knocking, all of that didn't actually, when you went up the chain of command, didn't actually report to Ron DeSantis or his campaign manager. They had like a separate ecosystem, a separate structure in place with someone else at the head of it. And so... yeah, it's really problematic.
Really problematic. Okay,
and Trump is then doing something similar. Yeah.
Yeah, so Trump is doing that as well?
Something similar, yeah. Not quite to the same degree.
Okay, so tell me, Brian, like I've heard about PACs, like I think Movement Voters Project has a PAC. Like, where is it beneficial to donate to PACs for people who are interested in this?
Yes. And the system is broken, without a doubt. But there are great people doing great work in PACs and through PACs. And so not every PAC is like a scam.
Right.
Some of the PACs that people would be familiar with, you're talking about Movement Voter. I think it's called Movement Voter PAC, right?
Yeah.
Also, the Anxiety Relief Fund is a PAC run by Vote Save America.
Great name.
Yeah, right. The actual purpose of a PAC is to like pool funds to achieve a specific goal. Where without Oath, right, because this is one of the reasons we built Oath, it would be extremely difficult for an individual to figure out all the state legislative races, or let's stick to federal because that is more complicated, to figure out exactly which U.S. House candidates they should give money to in order to flip the House. It's like a lot of work to figure that out. So instead, I could just write a check to a PAC, and the PAC could raise $1 million from a bunch of different donors, and then the PAC can cut checks to all of those candidates because they actually do the work.
It's kind of like a venture capital fund for campaigning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not dissimilar.
Yeah.
We at Oath think that as often as you can give directly to the candidate, that is the way to go. That you know exactly who's spending your money, that you can actually, at the end of the cycle, see a report of how the money was spent. You know exactly which candidate you invested in, whether they won or lost, and by what margin. And so we are all about connecting donors directly to the candidates. Oath does not have a PAC, and we do not ever take custody of the funds that people give on Oath. They go directly to the ballot measures, candidates, organizations that people are choosing to fund.
Yeah.
But it's a relatively new phenomenon and structure.
Yeah. And to that point, actually, I do want us to have a candid conversation because we love transparency. How do you get paid? Like, so I know with a lot of campaigns, people are like, how much of this is actually going to something? How much of it is it being taken by the organization? Like, how do you make money? And if somebody gives on Oath, is there like a percentage that's going to the things that they're selecting or that they're donating to? Or how does that work for Oath?
Oath does not take a cut of any of the donations through the platform. 100% of the donation goes directly to the recipients that you select.
So what, are you just like giving away all of your time? How are you funded, or how?
We are funded by voluntary tips from people who use the platform.
Oh, got it.
So when you donate, you can choose whether or not we like have a little thing in there. We never sell your data. We don't pass along your email or phone number to the campaigns that you're donating to. So you don't end up on all these lists, which is crazy. And so we tell people that, and we say, but if you want us to keep the lights on, like, it would be really great if you could add 5% or something to this.
Good. Okay.
And some people choose to do that and some people don't. And the idea is that with enough people using the platform, that would help us grow into the future.
Got it. And is it working that way, Brian? Like, are you guys doing okay?
Yeah, it's a numbers game, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And so it's all just about volume. The other alternative for people to give directly to these campaigns is ActBlue.
Right.
And they processed over $5 billion last cycle. So it's a huge space. And you can imagine sort of making like even a fraction of a percent on a huge amount is like enough. It's never going to make tons of money, right? Like that's not the goal. But it should be enough to like cover our relatively small team if we get up to like 10 or 15 people.
And is ActBlue, do they take a percentage? I forget, because I know that's where like the Harris Victory Fund uses ActBlue. Like, is that a percentage-based model versus a donor-based model that's more transparent, like you're talking about?
They do both. It's not entirely clear exactly what their interchange fee is. There's like a small credit card processing fee in both situations that's paid by the campaign.
Of course.
Oath receives none of that. I do believe, I don't know the exact number, but I do believe ActBlue does receive some cut of that.
Got it.
Yeah, our fee is just a little lower.
Yeah, sounds good. Awesome.
The credit card processing fee.
Got it. Okay. And then if people want to understand where their money is going, obviously to me, I trust you. Like I trust you and your team. I trust data and science and understanding. So I feel much more comfortable giving to you, not knowing exactly what my money is going to be used for with each of the campaigns. But if someone wanted to know or wanted to specifically be like, I want my money to go to door knocking or to go to ads or whatever it is there a way for people to connect with their money in that way to either dictate or to find out where it went?
We do it in the aggregate via individualized impact reports at the end of every cycle. So if you donate on Oath now, after the election in November, probably 2 weeks or so later, once all the results are in.
Give us some time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot of data. But we send out an individual report that says you gave to these races. Here's who won. Here's who lost, by what percent. What is going to change as a result of that? We flipped this chamber. They're going to pass. We expect them to be able to pass. Boom, boom, boom. We lost this chamber. Here's what's at stake because of it, or how we can mitigate that in the future. So it's like an individual report as to what you did with your funding for the cycle. So we can make some assessments like broadly about how different campaigns spend money. If you want to get really in the weeds, that's the fun, nerdy thing about political spending is that it's all there. You can go look at every single invoice that a campaign paid and how much and on what date and when you gave, and all of that is available at every level of the ballot. Yeah.
Awesome. I really love that about the report because it feels like, okay, I'm going to feel connected to like the impact that I've had, which always helps people, I think. So thank you for all that you're doing. My final question for you is more systemic, which is that it seems like we've talked about the fact that this system is broken. It's so confusing. It's really convoluted. And so people get really lost, which also makes them apathetic. And so it's not also creating an even playing field for people. So there's grassroots people like us, and then there's these giant corporations and billionaires who are spending all this money like you've talked about. I'm wondering if you see any trends or any like hope for the possibility of this shifting in the future, because it's clearly pretty messed up. So do you see anything that's happening with that? And is there anything that listeners can do to help affect that change moving forward?
Absolutely. I want to be clear. I love fundraising. I believe in the power of collective action to make change. I've spent most of my career raising money for the candidates and causes that I believe in, and I want to keep doing that. And so while I will always talk about and call out the system for where it is broken, there's a very powerful thing about putting power into the hands of people that we can get your neighbor elected who maybe doesn't come from money and doesn't have this super network or corporate PAC money backing them or something like that. Like our system is structured to allow us to do that. We just have to be more strategic about how we compete. And so I definitely believe in participating in order to make real change. And I believe in reform. And so it's like my life goal to accomplish campaign finance reform in the most comprehensive way. It's going to be a huge lift that's not going to be done in the 2020s. I doubt it will be done in the early 2030s. I think this is like a 10 or 20-year project that I feel very committed to. It's either going to take a different Supreme Court majority to overturn Citizens United, or it's going to require a constitutional amendment. And so those are big lifts. That hasn't happened in a long time, but it's possible. And if we work for it and we educate people about why it's important and we maintain that hope, because our democracy hinges on us maintaining that hope to stay engaged, then we can fight and we can win. And so I'm more committed than ever to making that happen. And if anything, Oath has just lit even more of a fire under my butt in order to get it done.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I love that. And maybe it will become one of the issues and initiatives on Oath Vote is campaign finance reform.
Absolutely.
Love that. So after the election, people can still give and still have an impact, which is true because Oath Vote does continue. This is not just about this election cycle. Brian and his team are doing amazing things and they will continue to do amazing things. And so this is a resource that you can rely on, not just for this election, but moving forward. And thank you, Brian, for everything that you do. You are so incredible. And thank you for all of your insights. For all the listeners, everything that we talked about will be in the show notes. If you have questions, comments, definitely comment on Instagram when I post, because Brian will also see that. And just engage, and go to Oath Vote to donate, to make an impact, and to feel more connected to where your money is going. And I hope this was informative. Thank you, Brian, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of The Connected Way. You can find all the resources mentioned in the show and even more resources in the show notes and on the podcast page at theconnectedway.com/podcast. Before you go, a note about sponsorship. This podcast is currently sponsored by me, Rev Dev, and you, the listeners. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and the work of The Connected Way, enhancing individual and collective connection to self, others, the land, and spirituality, you can donate on the podcast webpage. There is never any pressure or expectation, but if you feel called to support the work, any contribution of any amount helps, as do your good thoughts. And finally, I'd love to hear your biggest takeaway from today's show. What inspired you? What surprised you or made you think? Let me know by posting a comment on any of the posts or DMing me on Instagram, or of course, you can always send me a message on the website. Thanks again for being here, friends. May this podcast bring more connection to you and the collective. And so it is. See you next time.